Welcome to Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana basketball news and discussion, brought to you by the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Join me live at assemblycall.com every Thursday night and immediately following every IU game for our live IU postgame show. And visit InsideTheHall.com for complete coverage of IU basketball and to join the discussion in the Inside the Hall Premium Forum. On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, we bring in one of our favorite recurring guests, Rick Bozich from WDRB in Louisville. And I have to tell you, for an Indiana basketball podcast, we probably talk less about IU basketball in this podcast than we ever have before, and yet might be one of the best episodes of Podcast on the Brink that we've ever done. We just talk about a wide range of subjects, how everything that's going on right now with the pandemic and being at home is affecting, guys like Alex and Rick and the work that they do. Rick takes us through some of the other surreal moments that he's covered, including the earthquake at the 1989 World Series. We talk about how all of this is going to affect college sports, especially if the college football season gets impacted, what the impact then could be on basketball. And we do talk some about Indiana, how well-positioned Indiana is to deal with the fallout from all of this with Scott Dolson taking over for Fred Glass. We get Rick's thoughts on the greatest IU basketball player of all time bracket. And then we end with a little White Sox talk. We were all saddened by the death of Ed Farmer, and Rick tells some stories about Ed Farmer that I had no idea he had that kind of personal connection with Ed, and so he tells some of those stories. And look, even if you're not a White Sox fan, they're great stories and really worth listening to. So a wide-ranging conversation. We hope that you enjoy it, and it's just something to get through these times that we're in. I do want to remind you here before we get to the episode to go support our friends at Homefield Apparel, homefieldapparel.com. You can use that promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, to get 20% off your entire order. We continue to be impressed with Homefield and how they're handling everything that is going on right now, a small business that is doing right by their employees. And obviously they have great stuff, so whether you want to shop for some new IU gear, they have over 70 different colleges. So, maybe you have a friend or a family member that went to a different school and you want to get them, some unique gear with an old logo that maybe they haven't seen in a while. Just go to Homefield. If you've got some extra time, browse all the different stuff that they have. Heck, Coach Tonsoni from the Assembly Call, he just goes and buys gear that looks cool from other colleges because he wants to get it. So they've got a lot there, something for everybody, homefieldapparel.com. And again, use the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, for 20% off your entire purchase. Okay, here now is our conversation with Rick Bozich. Well, Rick, I thought we'd start out, I hope you don't mind, start out with something that's kind of a serious subject and kind of a personal subject. What is the proper way to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich?
Crunchy strawberry, then crunchy grape. And I'm smooth as, I don't turn my nose up at smooth, but, hearty men eat crunchy.
I agree with this. I'm a crunchy guy. Alex, are you a crunchy guy? And are you raising your kids to be crunchy people?
I'm more of the crunchy guy, but I think the kids are more of the creamy so far. So I can go either way with that. So any kind of peanut butter is good peanut butter for me.
Rick, we're trying to get likes and conversations started on social media, and
yeah.
So many times you can talk about some of the other stuff we've been talking about. So that got more interaction than anything I've tweeted in several ways.
Well, it's funny because yesterday Alex and I were texting back and forth about what we were going to do for an episode. And as we were texting, I saw that tweet come up. And I was like, all right, your dad's tweeting about peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Let's get him on the podcast. It's time.
I want you to ask Mike DeCourcy on Monday because that's always the way I start my week. And I need to know what DeCourcy thinks too.
I wonder has DeCourcy mentioned what he is?
Not that I know of. I'm going to guess he's, I'll say smooth strawberry.
I could see that. But he'll have a great defense for why smooth is better than crunchy. And it'll be really hard to come back at. So, okay. Well, now that we got the serious stuff out of the way, Alex, why don't we talk about sports?
Let's do it. Actually, the thing I wanted to ask you was, from your perspective, a couple of weeks ago, I don't even know how many weeks ago it was now because the days are all blending together. You were at
7
the ACC
years
tournament. Yeah, the ACC tournament. You were there when it looked like they were going to maybe play, and then obviously they pulled everybody off the court. But in terms of, you've covered Olympics, you've covered Final Fours, you've covered Super Bowls. But in terms of the most surreal sports moments that you can remember, where does that rank on the list, and what are some of the other ones that kind of immediately come to mind when I bring up just the kind of moments that you'll probably never forget from events that you've covered?
I'd have to say there's probably 4 or 5 of them. The first one that I can remember was I was at the Spectrum in Philadelphia when Indiana played Carolina for the national championship. And earlier on the day of the championship game, President Reagan was shot. And we all went to the arena that night not knowing if they were going to play the game or not. And they used to play consolation games. And then that night they canceled the consolation game between LSU and Virginia, and they eventually played the IU North Carolina game. And they got some criticism at the time because if something would have happened to President Reagan, while the game was going on, it would have been a really bad situation, but he pulled through and everything was fine. The next one I can remember was I was in, this is not nearly the same, but I think it was 87. I was covering either the World Series or the NLCS, and there was a big stock market crash. And that was a big topic of conversation. And then the only other one, and I'd say this in terms of being involved in it was worse, was October 17th, 1989. I was in Candlestick Park for Game 3 of the World Series on a Tuesday night. And they took batting practice and the whole deal. We were settling into our seats in the upper deck. And all of a sudden, the whole Candlestick Park started shaking. And I was convinced we were going down. I mean, it probably only shook for like 8 or 10 seconds, but it felt like it was, 45 seconds. And you could just feel like we're going down and the people below us. And fortunately, Candlestick didn't crumble, but a lot of other things in the area did, including the Bay Bridge and a part of the interstate in Oakland. And Joe Biddle, my friend in Nashville, and Mike Lepresti, who used to be the columnist for USA Today and now works for NCAA.com. Somehow we found some, there was a few payphones that still worked, and we were able to dictate short stories. But, and I had the office, you were home with Maggie and my mom, and the television broadcast of the game went out. So I'm sure everybody thought wow, what happened? And so I had the people in the office call and say I was okay. And then I remember Joe and I had ridden, I think, the BART transportation. We were staying in Oakland into San Francisco, and that was closed. So fortunately, Mike Lepresti had a rental car, and he drove us back from San Francisco to Oakland. And normally, without traffic, that might be like a 35 to 40-minute drive, and it took us 5 hours.
Wow.
We had to wind our way through the streets of San Francisco where there were a bunch of fires and stuff, and we went across the Golden Gate Bridge and had to go way far north past San Quentin. I remember I saw San Quentin prison, and then we came back down to Oakland, and then we were stuck in Oakland for 4 days before we could get a flight out. And then I came home, and the World Series, I think, resumed 8 or 10 days later, but we weren't there anymore. So, that, I think the earthquake thing initially was worse, but this is obviously worse, from the perspective of 3 weeks later.
Rick, when you're there in a moment like that, obviously as the building is shaking and that's coming out of nowhere, I'm sure your survival instinct kicks in and that's all you're thinking about. How quickly do you then switch into, hey, it's my job to report this also? Because it's, what is that mindset like in that moment for someone who's there as a journalist who isn't just thinking, I've got to get out of here? At some point, I'm sure you're thinking, I've got to tell the story.
Yeah. I remember 3 things. One was the first thing I did was I got up, like I was going to leave, and like Joe Biddle was next to me. He like grabbed me by the arm and goes, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm getting out of here." He goes, "There's just an earthquake. You're not going anywhere." And I sat back down, and then we just sat there and kind of all like talked to each other and tried to, understand what was going on. And the way we knew that how bad, because I've been in small, earthquakes before that we've had around here where you just feel the house shake and stuff, but this was obviously different. And the way we knew it was different was there was the scoreboard, which had all the lineups on it, went to like hieroglyphics. None of the electrical stuff worked. And then when minutes, you saw players' wives like carrying their kids out on the field, and they all headed down the right field line. And then at that point, I think we all started to. The first obstacle I remember was there weren't very many phones that worked. So it's like, even if we wanted to try and write something, how could we do it? And then somehow the word got out. There's a couple pay phones or a couple phones that worked. And I didn't even, at that point, I knew I needed to write something. And so I wrote, I didn't write something very long. I just wrote something to say that I was there and dictated it. So that was like maybe the third thing, because we think when you're there, I mean, people at home that were getting information off TV probably had more information than we had, because all we knew was what happened in the stadium.
Yeah. I'm curious, and I want to talk about the impact of everything that's happening now on the future of sports, because and obviously we don't know what that's going to be, but it's starting to come into a little bit of a clearer focus. But I'm curious from your guys' perspective, just how what's happening right now has changed what you're doing on a daily basis. Because obviously, you'd be preparing for the Final Four, just getting back from NCAA tournament games, and you spend so much time going to events, talking to people. How are you approaching it now that you have to do your job from your house and still, try to write things and create content that's interesting for people? How are you approaching that?
You can go ahead, Alex. Or you want me?
No,
yeah, I want to get it from both of you.
I can go. For me, it's basically, obviously a challenge now because the kids are in the house all day, and it's not as easy to kind of break away and make phone calls and try to text people. And I got to be respectful of the fact that they're going through this with me, and they need attention and need my support. So I can't just work all day, which is, what I'm used to doing as much as possible. But in terms of how it's changed things, I'll say I'm fortunate to have, someone like you, Jerod, that we can hop on here and still do our podcast like we normally do. Dylan and Cam have been awesome in terms of being proactive and trying to go out and get stories. I've talked to Anthony Leal last week. Dylan talked to Jordan Geronimo. It's basically just trying to reach out to as many people as possible and try to find interesting things. In terms of from an inside the hall perspective, there's obviously no IU basketball, and there's no recruiting right now, really, other than what's going on the phone line. So it's basically just trying to come up with things that you think people are going to enjoy. And right now the greatest Hoosier bracket has been, I think, a really great distraction for a lot of people, something to keep them engaged and entertained. But it's obviously changed things. This time of year, right now, the plan was obviously for us to cover the tournament and then swing into recruiting stuff this spring. I was already looking ahead at the Adidas circuit was going to be here in Louisville, and Nike was going to be in Indianapolis. Going out to those events and talking to recruits was going to be a big part of what we did. So right now it's just basically trying to be as creative as possible and come up with different ideas and different stories to write. And it's not always easy on a day-to-day basis, but I'm fortunate to have obviously you helping me and with Dylan and Cam. Unfortunately, I think the internship that Cam was going to have this summer is no longer going to happen. So he's going to be continuing to contribute to Inside the Hall, and Dylan as well. And so we'll just try to do our best, and we're thankful for all the people that have continued to read and support us, and the people that are in the forum. There's been a lot of great discussions in there, and you can, like, a time like this, it kind of comes through like how much you kind of have a greater appreciation for everybody. And there's been a lot of like community feel in there in terms of people just checking in on each other and making sure everybody's okay. And I remember a couple weeks ago we had somebody in there share that their son had tested positive for it, and the outpouring of support was incredible to see. So the other thing I've noticed too, which is something I hope that continues after all this, and it doesn't really have anything to do with my job, but it's just an observation. Like every day we've been taking bike rides around the neighborhood and walking and seeing everybody outside, and everybody's waving and smiling at each other. It's like that wasn't the way it was before. It was basically a lot of people were just kind of focused on themselves, and you realize the impact that all of this has on everybody, not only financially, but mentally. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are going through different things, and it's just cool to kind of, see your neighbors out. Maybe you don't stop and talk to them, but you at least wave and give a head nod and smile. And it's, that's not how it was. So I hope like one of the long-term lasting impacts of this is going to be that we're nicer to each other, and, and we come out stronger kind of as a community on the other side of this.
How ironic that it might take isolation to bring us together. Rick, how's it affecting you?
I give a ton of credit to WDRB where I work because they've been very proactive on this. I had not been allowed to. I got back from the ACC tournament 3 weeks ago today, which was March the 13th. And that weekend was the last weekend that I was allowed back in the stadium. They've pretty much told those of us who mainly write for the website to work from home. And they've even moved a lot of reporters and producers out to where they're working from home to making sure everybody can stay as apart but still do their job as possible. And wouldn't say that we're not near the top of the list of essential businesses, but I think news is important to getting people information that they need to have in this. So they want to keep everybody healthy so we can keep producing news. I've probably been writing more than I wrote before because I kind of feel like, I need to do something to occupy my time. And I've talked to all different kind of people, whether it's in the beginning, it was some former local athletes who are playing overseas and what it was like over there when the situation was worse there. Since then, I talked to Grace Berger, the IU women's basketball star. I've talked to Jim Host, who is the godfather really of collegiate sports marketing, who had some interesting perspectives this week on the challenges that will be ahead for major college sports teams when things come back, of how things will be different. John Calipari did a teleconference. Tom Allen did one. Whoever's available, we try and find a story somehow to make it relevant. And our website, the number of people who are visiting it has gone up, but it does feel weird in that we've been pushed out of the natural rhythm of what we're doing now, because as a journalist, this is Final Four weekend. This is the highlight of the season, and Indiana probably wouldn't have been in the Final Four, but Kentucky or Louisville certainly could have been, and the U of L women's team could have been. And who knows, IU women's team could have been a Cinderella team and made a run and been in it. So that's been taken away. And as a sports consumer, as a huge baseball fan, the baseball season would have started. So, like everybody else, our world has been turned upside down. And, I have a former work colleague who is dealing with this virus right now. So there's real world concerns in there as well.
Bringing it to college sports, we're still, 5 months away, I guess, from when the college football season would start. But, we're starting to hear a lot of talk about what that's going to be like. A, will they be able to play? And B, will they be able to play with fans? And, there are many reasons why that's important, but just from a financial perspective, so many athletic departments are dependent on the money that comes in from the gate receipts at football games. When you talk to people who kind of know about this, what are they expecting for football season, and what are some of the cascading impacts potentially even on basketball if the football season is interrupted to the point where fans can't be there in the stands?
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of uncertainty about what they're going to be able to do, when they're going to have to make the decision, the different layers of it. Can they actually ask players to come back on campus when they're not willing to let other students come back on campus? Is that really a reasonable request? And will some of them say, no, I don't want to do that? I mean, I don't feel like it's safe or healthy. So that's one question. And then if they play, I mean, as Jim Host mentioned, like, are people going to be comfortable walking into a football stadium and sitting right next to, or in front of, behind, next to people that, they might know some, but might know other ones, but they don't know their health condition? I mean, there are going to be some people who are reluctant. And how do you space people out? And how do you keep, we've all seen the long lines at concession stands and restrooms at halftime. That becomes an issue. And, it's just so complicated. I've seen the proposal that somebody wrote that, it'll just be a reduced schedule and only Power 5 teams will only play each other. Your only non-conference games will be like IU would play maybe in past years like a Wake Forest, but they wouldn't play the Indiana State or Charleston Southern games. So then that has a trickle-down effect for those schools that are dependent upon those guarantee checks to stay alive. So I don't know. And the first domino kind of fell, I thought, Thursday when the Iowa State athletic director announced across-the-board cuts of salaries for everybody in the athletic department. I think of nearly $4 million of saying, and then he said, if I think the word he used, like, if we don't have football, then it's going to be an ice age situation. So it's a very, very serious situation financially.
What do you think the trickle down effect could be on, like, the non-revenue sports? For example, IU. I mean, I think we all agree, basketball and football drive the bus financially for the athletic department and pay for a lot of these other programs. How concerned are you that if, they have to play reduced schedules in football or, basketball, things like that in the future, how concerned are you of the potential impact on things that are not revenue generating continuing to be viable? And maybe a school like IU has enough resources where they can continue to do a lot of those things, but there's a lot of programs in the lower levels of Division I where I just can't see those smaller non-revenue sports surviving if this goes on for a prolonged period of time.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think Jim Host mentioned that non-revenue sports would be vulnerable and understandable. I mean, football raises the most money at nearly every program in the country, I think. And so that's the top of the list. And then I would think men's basketball, women's basketball, and a few programs. And other than that, it's really hit or miss everywhere. And it not only comes down to like the sports, but I think there's also going to be a large examination of coaching salaries, coaching staff. I mean, you look at some of these football programs that have, they have 10 or 11 assistant coaches and 4 or 5 quality control assistants and, whatever else they have, the huge support staff. I guess what we're basically saying is the arms race, which we've all seen for so many years with the building of all these phenomenal facilities and all that. I think this will be something that finally slows that and causes a reexamination of how much of our resources need to be put in that stuff.
This seems like, look, we have seen how important leadership is at this time, from all the way up to the top to every organization that's going through a transition. How do you think Indiana is positioned to handle this? Given that they're obviously going through a transition in the athletic department, and Fred Glass stepping away, Scott Dolson taking over. Who knows how this situation changes the dynamics? If if Fred hangs around a little bit more to provide some guidance, what happens there? It does seem like sticking with Scott, who has obviously been around for a long time, will make the transition potentially easier than if if Indiana was bringing someone in from the outside and the kind of shakeup that could be. Do you see how well positioned do you think Indiana is to try and navigate some of these really tricky waters over the next 6-12 months?
I actually think they're well positioned. For the reason you mentioned, Scott Dolson's been around IU a long time, and he's well liked, well respected, and well connected to a lot of Indiana's prominent fans, boosters, donors, and I'm sure he communicates with them really well. I also think they're well connected because they've had a position, because they've had a lot of stability. Recently, Archie's been there 3 years. Tom Allen's been there, starting his full year, I think. 3rd or 4th, I don't remember.
4th, I think. 4th, yeah, it'll be his 4th.
4th. All right, and Terry Moran's been there. Yeagley's been there. Todd Yeagley's been there for a while. I mean, they've got a lot of stability, and I think a lot of their capital improvement projects have been completed. I mean, if they were just starting all the stuff they were spending at Memorial Stadium for football, be a bigger challenge. If they hadn't built Cook Hall yet, and they've renovated it now recently, is that right? Or upgraded the locker rooms, or the locker room stuff at Assembly Hall hadn't been done, be a big problem. They built the new volleyball facility and opened it last year. The baseball and softball stuff was upgraded 3 or 4 years ago. The only one I guess that would be up in the air right now is the soccer. Wasn't soccer on tap right now to be renovated and improved for next season? But I think overall they're in a good position.
Wanted to shift gears and talk about some fun stuff to talk about rather than keeping the tone so sobering. But last week we had on Bill Murphy, who one of the better IU basketball historians out there, and as you know, we're running our bracket challenge of the greatest Hoosier of all time. I just wanted to get your thoughts on this whole exercise. Obviously we already discussed last week your disbelief that Bobby Wilkerson didn't get out of the first round of the event, but just overall kind of your impressions of the bracket, how it was set up, and maybe forecast ahead who you think the favorite should be going forward. I think we're going to be to the Sweet 16 starting Monday.
All right, so I'll start with some full disclosure. Bobby Wilkerson, I got to make 2 road trips with the 75 team on the plane. The first one was to Northwestern and Wisconsin. The second one was to Iowa and Minnesota. And my seat on the plane as the Daily Student reporter was next to Bobby Wilkerson both times. And he always made sure that if there was an extra cookie, I got one, or, they didn't bypass me when they were passing out the food and stuff, because I was like the absolute bottom of the totem pole. And he made sure that I wasn't I didn't feel like I was, an intruder. And it was easy to feel like an intruder on that trip, considering who all the other people were. And I remember I did a story on him once at the Daily Student, and I went to his dorm room. He's like, hey, just come to my room and talk to me. So Bobby Wilkerson was always good to me. But he was a really good player, and he did jump center for IU, and he was a tremendous defensive player. I like Randy Whitman. Neither one of them were going to make it to the finals anyway. I think it's been a fascinating exercise. I voted in every round so far. When's the next one? Next week?
Yeah, Monday will be the Sweet 16 for the first.
I've tried to project like who the winners are going to be, and I would think from the first group it's going to be Bellamy or McGinnis, maybe? Is that right?
Schlunt, maybe.
Schlunt? I don't think Schlunt will get it. I don't think enough people. I mean, they respect him for what he did, but I'd say it'll be McGinnis or.
I think Bill thinks in terms of like the actual player, he was the best by far. But I agree with you that he may have, he doesn't have the name recognition that Bellamy and McGinnis. Like McGinnis was Jerod is. We've talked about, he was one of the harder ones to put in the bracket, because I think we can all agree that he was, from a talent perspective and what he maybe went on to do, he was a top 10 player in IU history. But you're looking at 1 year, and the team success wasn't necessarily on par with a lot of the other guys. But yes, from a name recognition, I would say Walt Bellamy and McGinnis have as good a shot.
Now, is the second group the one that's going to have Isaiah Thomas and Scott May and Quinn Buckner?
Yes.
The
first night era.
Benson?
Yes, Benson's the 2. Isaiah's the 3.
And May's the 1. I mean, I'm going to predict that Isaiah wins because I think more people know him. I know I'm not going to win. I'm going to vote for Buckner just because I look at things differently than other people, because Buckner changed the whole arc of the program. Buckner was, in his day, top 5 recruit in the country, and he could have gone to UCLA when every good player in the country went to UCLA or Michigan. And he came to IU and started as a freshman and took a team to the Final Four that was beating UCLA in the second half of a national semifinal game until there was a bad call against Steve Downing. And then the next year they won that college commissioners tournament, which nobody really knows what it is, but that was like all the runner-ups of the top leagues in the country. They only did that tournament 1 year. That was before you had to win the league to go to the NCAA tournament. They could have won that year. They went to the Conference Commissioners Tournament and won it, the only time they even had that tournament. And then the next year they won every game except for the rematch game. And then the next year they won it all. So Buckner's, he played all 4 of those seasons. So I know he's not going to win because his offensive numbers don't stack up to these other guys. But to me, in terms of the whole picture, Buckner would deserve to win. But I think Isaiah Thomas will beat Scott May. The next one, I think it'll be pretty clear cut. It's going to be Calvert Chaney, which it should be. Or is he going against Alford?
He'll be going against Alford.
I think, Alford's got a national title. That's going to be
tough.
That's
that was one of the hardest ones for me to figure out who should be 1 or 2.
I think Damon Bailey's got a chance there too, just because of the name recognition, even though his accomplishments as a player. But everyone, I mean, he's a legend in terms just of people knew him since he was an 8th grader, followed him all through high school, and then followed him all through his IU career. I'm not saying that he's going to beat Alford, but I think it could be closer. Just because the other thing I said last week when we were talking to Bill was there's a certain segment of the IU fan base who will be disgusted enough with some of the things Alford has done as a coach in terms of what he did at Iowa and things like that, that they won't vote for him. They won't look at the player that he was and his impact on the program, and they'll maybe look more favorably upon Bailey. Do you agree with that, Jerod?
Yes, I think Ryan Phillips has poisoned the voting block enough that that might be true.
And then the last group is what, Zeller and Oladipo and what, Eric Gordon or
Yogi.
Victor will probably win that.
I think Victor will win. So then it comes down to Victor and Chaney and be Isaiah and I don't know. I'm going to say it's going to be Bellamy. I don't know. I think in the end the winner's going to either be Isaiah Thomas or Calvert Chaney. That'll be my guess.
Yeah, the first half of the night era, that bracket is just unbelievable. I mean, there's 3 guys that you could make an argument that should win the whole thing. You know. I mean, it's really incredible when you look at just how many good players and how many accomplishments there were in that era. It's unbelievable. And that's the smallest era in terms of years of all of them, but it's just so jam-packed with players who achieved so much.
Right. Yeah, there were. I mean, I was there for a good part of that. I mean, the very first year when he came in and Steve Downing became really good. Joby Wright was good for that first year that they had him, and John Ritter, and then the next year, when Cruz and Buckner and those guys started to play, and then the next year is when it really took off with Benson and May and Wilkerson and them. But I mean, Abernathy was a really good player. Steve Green, Laskowski was a good player. I mean, that was the golden era for IU basketball, no doubt about it.
Yeah. On the subject of Alford, I want to ask you, we're doing a live rewatch of the 1987 Final Four game, the IU UNLV game. It's so funny, I opened up the YouTube video for the rewatch, and it, cuts right to Brent Musburger and Billy Packer talking about the game. And Billy Packer's talking about, UNLV, they really want to run and gun. I think the only chance for Indiana in this game is to slow it down, get it into a half-court game. And, which, look, a lot of people were saying that at the time. Obviously, in hindsight, we know how wrong that was, and Indiana did not approach the game that way. What are your recollections of that game, which is always brought up as one of, the great Bob Knight coaching performances of all time?
I remember being surprised that it was so frantic and athletic and up and down as it was. I like a lot of us, we thought IU would try and slow it down and win a game in the 60s or 70s instead of in the 90s. And they won, even though Freddie Wade made, was it 11 threes? Is that what it was?
Freddie Banks, yeah.
Freddie Banks, yeah. Mark Wade was the other guard. Freddie Banks made 11 threes, right?
Yeah.
Indiana only attempted 4 threes, all by Alford, I think, right?
Mm-hmm. I believe that's correct. 2
out of 4. They crushed them at the line. Which means they were attacking and getting fouled and going to the line. I just remember, it was just a phenomenal offense. What Indiana shooting? Did they shoot like 57% or 62? I looked it up the other day. It was some ridiculous number that they shot. In Vegas, Armand Gilliam was on that team.
Yep, he was on that team.
You couldn't handle him. I think he had 12 or 14 field goals. I mean, he was ridiculous. So
Indiana shot 62.5%.
62.5%.
They took 28 free throws. Yeah, UNLV was 13 of 35 from 3. Freddie Banks hit 10 of them. Mark Wade had 18 assists. And Indiana was 2 for 4 from downtown.
2 for 4, and Alford took all of them, right?
Yeah, it was all Alford. And he took 13 free throws, too.
Right. So he wasn't just being a jump shot guy. He was driving and getting fouled and going to the line. So it was Knight. crafting a game plan that he was confident in and against the grain, and then his guys executing it. And that's been what now 33 years ago. That's a long time. I haven't seen that game probably since that day, and I'm not sure I've ever watched a replay. I'd like to watch it.
Yeah.
Where's that on YouTube?
Yeah, it's on YouTube.
And the 76 game's on YouTube too, the Michigan game?
Yeah, the 76 game is. We're going to do a live rewatch of that on Monday. Okay. So, yeah.
What time are you guys doing that?
8 Eastern. We start the rewatch and then doing a post-game show afterwards.
Because I'm not sure I've ever watched the replay of that game either.
Yeah, it's been so much fun going back and watching some of these old games and just watching, the thing that jumps out constantly when you watch the old Bob Knight teams play. And I know, he's obviously got a reputation for being a great coach in all sorts of ways, but you always hear about the tough man-to-man defense. And obviously the good Indiana teams played that. But man, it is magnificent watching them play offense. It really is, because it's just, it's just something that we don't see. And you watch the contrast. I mean, we did a couple of night games, and then, you watch the 0-2 game against Kent State with Mike Davis. And obviously that was a great offensive performance, but it was so different. It was all sets, and it was, just a totally different style of offense. But, watching some of the 90s teams playing on back and just the, the way that the motion worked and it's like you just don't see that, and you'd love to see, offense played like that again. But it took great fundamentals and guys, kind of being on the same page. And, it's so much fun to go back and watch and relive those great offenses.
Well, yeah, what jumps out at you is a lot less dribbling. I mean, a lot less dribbling. And you used to, I think Knight was one of them, and Eddie Sutton was another one that would basically have rules like nobody takes a shot until at least 4 passes are made. I mean, that was like, and the whole idea was to get the defense to move and find a hole in the defense. The more you get them to move, the more likely it is somebody's going to break down or not be where they need to be, and then you take advantage of it. So, yeah, the screening, not only screening. Now you see mainly screening at the top of the key on the high pick and roll.
Yeah.
Then you used to see a lot more screening low on the block to get guys open for those curls coming off the lane at the bottom of the lane. And just motion offense, self-explanatory. All 5 guys are moving, trying to find a way to create a mismatch or some kind of an opening. But the main thing is so much less dribbling. And I know it wasn't Indiana. I went back and watched 83 Kentucky Louisville game, the first time they played the NCAA tournament, and it was an overtime, and Louisville won, and they had a jump ball to start the overtime period, and Louisville passed the ball 20 times before Lancaster took a shot. I slowed it down and counted them. 20 passes before the first shot. Different world.
Yeah.
Now, there wouldn't be any room for somebody who liked to pound the ball.
Mm-mm.
Jerod, I know one thing that probably excited you. I don't know if you saw the tweet. It was either yesterday or the day before. IU put out something with like an old TV set, and it said we're bringing back the classics. So maybe that means they're going to release some old. Did you see that?
No, I didn't see it.
Yeah, you'll have to go check it out. It was either on Facebook or I think it was on the IU Hoosiers, the main Twitter account, but it said basically we're bringing back the classics, and it had like an old TV set. So I took that to mean like we're going to have some footage or games released. So that would be cool to see. But
That's
one
great.
thing I just realized that we never talked about, and it seems like it was actually a little less than 2 months ago. And I remember at the time when this happened, like Jerod and I,
it feels like a lifetime ago.
The cycle of our show was a little off at that time, so we didn't really we previewed the Purdue game before, and then we didn't do a show until several days later, and it was kind of past the news cycle and we didn't talk about it. But you were there with me. All of us were there the day that Bob Knight returned. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that whole scene, and I think based on the conversations I've had with not only you but Jerod over the years, it's something I think that none of us ever thought would happen. And the fact that it did happen, I think produced what may be ultimately the most memorable moment that I can remember since probably the Watford shot for IU basketball in recent memory.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thrilled that it happened. I'm thrilled that Pat Knight and Quinn Buckner and Randy Whitman and Scott May and whoever else, Scott Dolson, were able to pull it off. and I'm glad that Bob Knight agreed to do it, and I'm glad that fans responded the way he did. It's sort of considering everything that's happened since then, it's something like if you talked about it now, you would doubt it would happen in terms of, first of all, there's nobody in the arena and whether they would bring him into a large gathering like that. But thank goodness that it did. And I thought IU handled it well. And I was glad to see 50 players there from all different parts of his run that were out on the floor with him. And, it's a wound that needed to be closed. And I think now everybody can move forward with whenever basketball resumes with the future instead of always picking at that. It was like a scab that never would heal. And people that even some of Knight's people who were Bob Knight supporters when he first was removed as the IU coach, I don't know what the percentage was, but a percentage of them had started to turn against him because of some of the things he'd said and things he'd done. And I thought that was unfortunate. And now I think everybody can say, okay, that's over now. Let's move on.
It's flabbergasting that was less than 2 months ago.
It is flabbergasting.
It really is. I want to close up here, Rick, as we sometimes do when the three of us get together and talk about a White Sox topic, because there are a few smart members of our audience that are White Sox fans. But sad news yesterday is the great Ed Farmer passed away, and I think all of us who are White Sox fans, spent so much time either driving in the car at nights or whatever, listening to him call games. I mean, to me, his voice and Hawk's voice are the two voices that I associate the most, with listening to White Sox games growing up. Your thoughts on Ed Farmer?
Yeah, it really bothered me. I as just a listener, a lot of nights I walk my dog, and I listen to 2 or 3 innings on the radio when I'm out walking my dog. So it's like I'm always part of a conversation between Ed Farmer and Darren Jackson, and I never say anything. But I even go back, and Alex remembers because we have a picture that when he was with John Rooney, and he started out, and John Rooney used to work in Louisville, so I knew him pretty well, and he invited me to the booth, and there was a game that Lane Gold, a friend of ours, and Alex and I sat up in the booth with Farmer and Rooney for the game. And even after John left, my last time with Ed was July of 2018. The White Sox played the Reds, and the White Sox, as everybody knows, been terrible the last few years, but I got there early. Sat in the dugout, and he saw me, came over and gave me a hug. And I sat in the dugout, and he talked to me for like an hour. And like, hey, there's Lucas Giolito. Say hi to my friend Rick. And there's Tim Anderson. Say hi to my friend Rick. There's Ronaldo Lopez. It's like he introduced me to like 6 players. It was unbelievable. And then he goes, you're going to sit in the booth, right? I said, well, I have a press pass. He goes, no, you're going to sit in the booth. And so I sat in the booth the whole game with him and Darren Jackson. About the 3rd or 4th inning, he goes, I didn't like that press food. I need some pizza. Would you mind going to the concession stand and getting me some pizza? So I went to the concession stand and bought him like 2 pizzas and sat there, and between innings, he's like telling me what he really thinks of a bunch of players and stuff. And then I leave and I'm driving home, and he like calls me on the phone. Are you making it okay? Yeah, I'm making it okay. And then he's telling me more stories about White Sox stuff. And it's like, that's a memory I can never thank him enough for.
Wow.
Yesterday, I've read all the stories about it, and the White Sox did like teleconferences with, I think, Hawk, but they did one with AJ Przinsky and Paul Konerko. And to hear those guys talk about, Farmer, he got me on Augusta National, or, Farmer, he got me into this hockey game or whatever. It's like, that's the way he interacted with everybody. I mean, he really was. He was you should go back and Google Konerko and Przinsky about Hawk, and read the things that they remember about him. And he's a fascinating dude. And the 2 other things I'll say is, one is he hated the Cubs as much as we do, but he hated the Yankees more. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the story. When he was growing up, the Yankees were dominant in the American League, and he got drafted by Cleveland or signed with Cleveland, and then he got traded to somebody, and then he got traded from the Tigers to the Yankees. And he tells the story on the radio like once every summer. He refused to go. He said, I'm not going to go there. What do you mean you're not going to go there? I'm not playing for the Yankees. And I looked it up on his baseball reference page, and 2 days later, the Yankees sold him to another team. He did refuse to go to the Yankees because he disliked them that much. So he was like the ultimate White Sox guy. He was born on the south side of Chicago. He was a White Sox guy. He worked for him almost all of his career. He played for him, made the All-Star team. So, I mean, you're not going to put him up there with Nelson Fox or, Canerco or Aparicio or, all the great White Sox, Frank Thomas. But in terms of having White Sox in his blood, Ed Farmer is right up there with anybody. And so,
wow,
just it's a sad day for me. It really was.
I didn't realize you had such a personal connection with him. I did not realize that.
Yeah. And I got really worried last year. I don't know how much you listen or not, because I know that I'm obsessive about it, but he missed a lot of games over the last 6 weeks last year. And I was like texting him and he didn't answer. And I have a friend who is connected with the White Sox, and he said, he's got some health issues. He's not doing very well. So then I figured this year I texted him before Sox Fest, and he seemed to be doing a little bit better. And then he was at spring training, but he didn't do a game. And I texted him and he didn't answer. And a friend of mine said, that at that point that his health was not great. And as we all know, he had a kidney transplant, but he's a guy who, he just loved the White Sox. He loved baseball, and he's going to be missed for the White Sox. The radio broadcast will not be the same. Darren Jackson did a teleconference yesterday, and I read that he broke down during the middle of it because there's so many guys. You forget that he helped break him in. He helped break Chris Singleton in. And all these guys talk about how nice he was to them. It's not when I talk about what he did the same stuff for a lot. Everybody that he would encounter, if you're a Sox fan, he went out of their way to sort of connect with you because he thought, that was an important bond. He's also, and I'm biased, I know, he's also very emblematic of the White Sox culture. When you look at the White Sox, they have a lot of people who work for that franchise who are there forever. Jerry Reinsdorf, for whatever you want to say about him, is tremendously loyal. And once you're a White Sox guy, you're a White Sox guy forever. And that was Ed Farmer.
Yeah. Oh,
I only met him a few times. I only met him a few times, obviously, when I was with you. But I can just remember when I went to Sox Fest for a couple of years, it would always be one of the more – they have those breakout panels where they have players up there and talking and all that. And I'd always look forward to the ones where he was kind of the MC or running the show because he would ask the best questions of players and kind of get them to open up and be a little bit more – personal and stuff than he was never he was kind of just off the cuff a lot and entertaining, and all the weird things he would say on the radio. It just kind of like it would catch your ear, and the stories that he told. I mean, to be, I think, a good baseball, when he was with Rooney, he was more the color guy, but later in his career, he took over kind of as the play-by-play after Rooney left. And for him to kind of be able to slide over and do both of those, it's a lot of people don't realize how much dead air and free time there is in announcing baseball games. But he would always have an anecdote or a story or something to kind of fill that time, and a funny story he could make whoever was working the game with laugh. And I mean, he was, I remember that 2005 season. That was the first year Michelle and I started dating, and I think she thought I was crazy because we watched pretty much every game the whole season. And I remember I had DirecTV, and that was the first year, the year after maybe I got XM radio, because that was the first when that started coming out. And I remember I had DirecTV. I would pause the game on DirecTV and I would turn the radio on my XM on to get it synced up perfectly. So no offense to Hawk, but I always liked I loved Hawk, but I always had Rooney and Farmer on, and I would be a little bit behind, obviously, on what was happening. But it wasn't like you followed games on Twitter back then, so there wasn't anything to be spoiled. Yeah. So I would always watch the games that 2005 season and listen to those guys synced up, and that was him and Rooney that season was awesome. I remember also just kind of seeing him when they had the parade after they won the World Series. He's up there on the float with all the players and stuff. You could just tell how much they loved him. So it's a huge, huge loss for the White Sox community. I even went on Sox Talk yesterday and posted about it because that was a website I used to frequent a lot back before my inside the hall responsibilities and everything kind of took all my time on the internet. But I went back to Sox Talk and posted about his passing, and it's a big loss for White Sox fans everywhere.
Well, I'll say one last thing. In 2005, when they won the World Series, I was in New York covering the Breeders' Cup at the Long Island Marriott, and I watched the last game by myself in my room. People wanted to go out. I was like, you don't understand. I mean, I don't want to be around with other baseball. This is like, I've waited my whole life for this. I'm watching this by myself. And I was in my room, and I had the sound muted on the television because I didn't want to listen to Buck and McCarver, and I was watching the game and listening over the internet to Rooney and Farmio. And I'll still remember, their call when it was over, and I'll never forget his call on the Konerko Grand Slam in Game 2. You can watch that on, and his catchphrase was "light it up," meaning the scoreboard. He goes back to the Bill Veeck days when that was a big part of the White Sox identity. They were the first team with the exploding scoreboard. So, rest in peace, Farmio. He's had a tough life. His kidney transplant was like over 25 years ago, so he beat the odds in a lot of different ways. And I've read a number of stories of how much medication he had to take, and he never would back down. So that's how I'll remember him.
Well, do we think we're getting baseball this year?
I don't know. I hope we get a shortened season, and I hope baseball uses it as a year of experimentation. There's been a lot of talk about things baseball needs to do to change things. So as long as you're going to have a abnormal season, why not, try some things you've been thinking about trying, whether it's the way you end games, not playing extra innings, the way it's, actually enforcing the pitch count, whatever else making, they already are going to the thing where you have to face 3 batters, right? Unless it's the end of the inning.
I believe so.
Anything that they're thinking about experimenting, I think they need to pick 3 or 4 of them that they really like and try it and say, hey, this is going to be a season unlike any other. Let's try this and see how it works.
Yeah. Well, Rick, thanks for coming on with us.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always good to get together. And we forgot one thing. Happy birthday to Alex.
Whoa. Is it your birthday today?
Yeah.
It is.
Oh, man. I swear, I have an alert somewhere set up to remind me of that, but it hasn't reminded me yet. Happy birthday, Alex.
Thank you.
Thanks for the reminder there.
All right.
What, 38 years young.
You have a big celebration planned?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go outside and bang pots and pans together.
That's about all you can do right now.
That's what they did, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it's a nice sunny day out here. So high 60s, low 70s, not much you can ask for given the circumstances. So it'll be an uneventful day, but it is what it is, and look forward to maybe next year will be a little bit better.
Go back to Disney World, where your birthday should be spent.
Or go to Comiskey Park.
That's right.
or what guaranteed right field.
It'll always be Comiskey. It'll always be Comiskey.
Did you ever go to the old one?
Me?
Yeah.
I think I did go there with my dad. I was really young, though.
I think Alex remembers we went to a doubleheader when Craig Graybeck and somebody else hit back-to-back homers off Nolan Ryan, and then he drilled some guys after that. Remember that?
Yep, I do.
Fregosi was the manager, and after the game, we went in the clubhouse, and Fregosi gave him all this balls and bats. And remember that?
I do remember.
One of my favorite young White Sox memories is my dad and I went up to a game. My dad's a big Yankees fan because he grew up a big Yankees fan, but we would always go up to White Sox games just because they were close. And we went to a White Sox-Yankees game, and there was some new pitcher for the Yankees who was starting that day named Mariano Rivera. It was his rookie season when he came up as a starter. I mean, Washington, he pitched really well. We were like, wow, who's this guy? Not, of course, knowing that, he would soon be the greatest closer of all time.
White Sox tried to trade for him. That didn't get very far.
No, but that was fun. So many great memories of going up there.
Yep.
Look forward to
doing it. Stay safe,
again.
Everybody, and stay healthy, and do this again whenever you need me.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. Remember to join me and my co-hosts for more IU basketball talk at assemblycall.com and visit Alex over at insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana basketball. If you want to support Podcast on the Brink, here is the single best way to do it. Tell anyone you know who loves IU hoops about us and suggest that they subscribe. Podcast on the Brink can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else podcasts are available. Tell your social media followers, email your friends, text your family members. For weekly discussion about IU basketball, they need to be subscribed to Podcast on the Brink. We'll talk to you next time. Go Hoosiers.